this meeting of the King George County Board of Supervisors. I will open with an invocation, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance from Mr. Miller. So if everyone could please rise. Lord, we just come before you this day. We thank you for the blessings you've given us. We thank you for watching over us and keeping us safe. We just ask that you be with us this evening. We ask that you guide us, give us discernment and wisdom as we look into the business of this community. Just ask that you help us to make the right decision, the decisions that would be in the best interest of our citizens, as well as in the interest of your glory, Lord. Just help us to make decisions that would bring glory to you through our actions. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, do we have any amendments to the agenda?
I believe we have an amendment, and you have been presented that.
Okay, I don't see Ms. Hardin here at the moment, but my understanding she is here and she would like to provide some information about proration. So if my colleagues would be willing to entertain to the amend the agenda to include Ms. Hart as part of the constitutional officer's presentations, I would appreciate that.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion properly second. Do we have any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, we will move on to public comments. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person in order to afford everyone an opportunity to speak. If comments relate to a specific public hearing item, we ask that you offer those comments at the time of the public hearing. When you come up, please state your name and your address. And the floor is open for public comment now.
Good evening, Anthony Stats, 9007 Clare Street. We all just witnessed the Service Authority meeting, and I have a lot of concerns. Though the Service Authority reports to the Board of Supervisors, there's a lot of things that went on in that meeting that is very concerning. First off, the amount of debt that the Service Authority is in, and they plan to mitigate that debt as putting the Service Authority under the Board of Supervisors as a department under the county. That is a horrible, horrible, horrible idea. And when the financial advisor for the county came up and said, well, this won't be put onto the taxpayers who are on well, who don't already pay into the Service Authority, this won't be taken out the general funds. We all heard this story before with landfill. Oh, we'll save $2 million. Oh, this will be easier. I don't believe it for 1 second. There is no way putting this under the county as a department will save us a buck. Not only that, I foresee in the near future that maybe the same Service Authority board or maybe a different one, what they will do is they will try to lower rates and they will try to balance it on the books of well payers and well users. That should be a red line in the sand. I think that should be a hard no-go on that. So when the financial advisor comes up here and he said it 3 or 4 times, I wouldn't really trust him. Second thing I want to bring to the board's attention is something that other counties do. It is a lame duck rule. It says that supervisors who are not running for re-election should not be able to vote. Other counties in the Commonwealth and across the nation do it. It is very, very strong to our democracy to protect it for people who will not be accountable, who are voting on very consequential items such as maybe another data center, maybe solar farms in King George. There are a lot of things in this county that are very important. And for supervisors who are not running for re-election to have a say on that is very, very dangerous, considering already for 2 seats on the board currently, early voting is open. And, well, early voting, all of King George is open. But for those 2 seats in particular, the at-large and Dahlgren, the supervisors currently are not running for re-election. So that should even put a more strain on the fact that we need a lame duck rule in this county because of the fact that people in this county are already voting for their next supervisors. And the supervisors currently will not be held accountable for their actions that they vote. So I ask the county to please consider that. Thank you.
You're so funny. Hi, my name is Ana Maria Lobo. I live in Presidential Heights. I want to thank you for your service to the county, and I hope that you make good decisions since you are part of the community. I also wanted to remind you about the elimination of the annual decal fee since our taxes last year was 40% higher. I don't remember our taxes ever been that high in 50 years that I live in here. I also don't think people even realize that they are paying for decal because it's listed on their tax bill as a license fee, $23 for each vehicle that they own. In the past, they give it out in actually decal. It's okay to pay one-time fee when people move into the county, but not year after year. In 1997, the governor, Jim Gilmore, wanted to eliminate the car tax or personal property tax imposed on vehicles ownership, as it has long been highly unpopular in the state of Virginia. For example, for a 15-year and a 1-year-old vehicle, we pay over $1,000 a year. The thing is that we had to pay $46 a year for nothing. And these days, people struggle to pay the bills. Everything is so high. People, sometimes they're already retired and they have to come back to work because they cannot pay the bills. Everything is so high. Thank you.
Mr. Dines, do you know anyone online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Claudette Jordan, 11773 Big Bear Lane, Lusby, Maryland. On behalf of the Ralph Bunche Alumni Association and the Ralph Bunche Advisory Committee, I'm here tonight to thank you, supervisors, for resurrecting the advisory committee. The two groups got together and put on one heck of an event last Saturday. And I want to give praise where praise is due. Without Annie Kupka, Chris Miller, Renee Parker, and I'll throw myself in there, it would not have been possible. And I want to talk about Coach Bender, who got off the track and came in, assembled chairs and tables, and she rolled right back to disassemble chairs and tables. It takes a lot to put on an event like that. And we had support from the region and from locals, Bloomia, Mary Washington Foundation, Bennett Funeral Home, Long and Foster, Ruby Brabo, a private LLC for STEM, Exit Realty, and then individual sponsors, Annie Kupka, Renee Parker, Ernestine Jefferson, Robert Stein, and there were people there from Philly, from New Jersey, Florida, as far away as Staunton, Virginia. So there were bed nights and food and gas, bringing revenue to the county. I alone put in 2 bed nights and ate like a horse. And, you know, I didn't drink booze, but I drank a lot of ginger ale and shopped at Walmart for the occasion. And it was dedicated for the museum, Night for the Museum. That was the topic. I want you to know that the Ralph Bunche Alumni Association is really dedicated to upholding everything that's in the Memorandum of Understanding. And the Ralph Bunche Advisory Committee, we're all endeavoring to fulfill our responsibilities for capital fundraising, for the school, and also for the museum. Because if you don't revitalize the school, you can't put a museum in. And the pledges are rolling in. People really appreciate it. There are a couple of people there who attended the event. A good time, I think, was had by all. And you'll get a report. I think it's supposed to be now, maybe, I don't know, but I'll go back and read to know when the report is due to you regarding the Memorandum of Understanding. And we're just so grateful for the relationship and how we're able to move forward. So once again, thank you one and all.
Did anyone receive correspondence to be entered into the record? Okay, then I'll close public comment and we'll move on to reports from members of the board. Mrs. Binder.
Thank you to everyone who came and spoke. Ms. Jordan, I got your flyer right here, Night for the Museum. It was a nice event. A lot of dancing was had. Ms. Kupka was out on the floor dancing. Not good at dancing, so I just saw the energy in the room, and it was a good time. One of the most coolest parts was seeing the class of 1965, which had said on one of the they had pictures of each of the classes that graduated on each of the tables, and the class of 65 was the biggest. And when you think biggest, it was probably, if Ms. Jordan could tell me, maybe 20 people, 25 people, but I don't know. I'd have to say almost all of them were there and took a class photo. And that was pretty cool to see all of them still there and talking to them and hearing some of their stories. And it was like a big class reunion, and it was quite a fun event. And it was a good time had by all. So thank you all involved in it. So Mr. Granger and I think it was the week before, everything kind of rolls around. We do so much over the week. We went and had a nice tour with Mr. Innes from All Points Broadband, and it was about the initiative. So I know I'm kind of a bear on Mr. Innes and All Points Broadband to make sure that they do what they said and provide service. But it was a very appreciative and interesting explanation of what have been the delays. And one of the biggest delays is Dominion Energy. They have to actually put in requests to, it's a complicated process, but they basically have to put in a lot of places new poles because there's quite a few things, as we learned on the visit, that go on a utility pole. And so they have to get new poles and have to move the placements around. And so one of their biggest challenges is you put in an application for a utility pole to be either replaced or moved or that, and then you have to wait a process. The process is about 100 and some days. Well, some of the applications have been in for over 300 and some days. So part of the problem is getting those poles, replaced and that process of the application moved along. So if Dominion, if you're hearing tonight or watching us, could you hurry it up? Because there's a lot of people in King George that would like the service. And All Points is hoping to be able, once the grant is completed, because not everyone can be covered under this grant. Once the grant is completed, that they will be able to service all of the county because they're trying to lay the fiber everywhere so that when the grant expires and they're able to provide the service, they can provide the service to the whole county. And they're looking, hopefully, if the poles get up, because we saw them when we were out there, they were moving really fast to put the wires up on the poles. If they get those poles approved, it could be quick to get this process started, and maybe by the end of the year. So I hopefully, especially for the residents of Shiloh, I hope that happens so that those that need internet can get it turned on. And we have a lot of people that work from home who would like that service. Now, one other thing I want to bring up to my board members is, as some may know, I'm on a state committee about solar regulations, but within it, I've interacted a lot with DEQ, and they've been talking about their education program they're trying to start up to try to help localities understand more about what DEQ does and the information they can provide to help us. And I've said, basically, since we have a turnover in election, it would be really great for the new members to be able to ask questions. So they're willing to come to us and bring some folks so we can ask them questions. So what I need from my colleagues, and I already asked the Service Authority Board, was what kind of topics would they like the members of DEQ to come? Because when I talked to Miss Susan Tripp, who's part of their air renewables, I forget, it was a long title, but they just need to know who they can bring to help answer our questions. It'd be like a Q&A educational session. So what topics, I know I've already heard from the Service Authority Board, but what topics would folks like? And once I get the topics to them, they'll coordinate with Mr. Miller about and Mr. Granger when they can come onto our agenda. So is there any specific topics? Silence.
Which ones did the Service Authority identify, just out of curiosity?
Groundwater, surface water, wastewater. I added in the air renewables because that has to do with data centers, solar, because they use batteries and permitting. So and then stormwater management.
That was going to be the last one I was going to bring up, waterways in general, just because I know we have a number of them and the impact it has to our ability to develop in those regions.
Right. Any others you can think of? No. Right, well, I'll send that email to them, and then they'll give us some experts that can come and they'll coordinate with Mr. Miller and yourself, Mr. Granger. But that is the end of my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Binder. Mr. Collins?
Thank you and good evening. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for those that are online. So, Ms. Jordan, good to see you. I'm glad that it went well. Ms. Level, I know you're a fan of the getting rid of the sticker tax. I think we're going to have some more presentations on that in a little while. Now to the Water Authority. So let me just give a little explanation about the Water Authority. So the Water Authority started off in King George. All the Board of Supervisors members were on the Water Authority. But when they started off, all the private systems, people, they wanted to sell them. King George says yes, paid millions of dollars. As soon as they got a hold of them, the state said, hey, you need to pay $1 million to get up to speed. So there's been debt since day one. Then anything that goes on, any repairs, any infrastructure needs, then the users pay for it. There's not enough users. You're talking about bringing the Water Authority under the county purview. The Water Authority hadn't worked before. Who expects for it to work in the future? I would be more inclined to dissolve the Water Authority, and that I don't want the Water Authority to making debt for the county and still be under the umbrella of the county. Also, the $25 million in debt for the Water Authority. So the Hop Yard, that developer paid for their entire system, and now their citizens are on the hook for half their bill, which is $150. That's the half. It's $300. They're paying for debt service that they didn't incur. They didn't do that. So they're spreading it out amongst all the users. So when the argument comes, hey, I have a well, you do have a well. So the argument comes, the fire department. So yes, county taxes are paying for the fire department, but the county taxes are not paying for the water that they put in their trucks to take to the fire. So those on the Water Authority are paying for the infrastructure to get that water to the fire department to go put out a fire at your well, at your house that has a well. So if we're going to go that route, then maybe the folks that have a well, if they, in case in need of a fire, they'll have to pay a surcharge for that infrastructure to get that water to the fire department so they can use that water. You shouldn't have all the pain on the customers. The pain's been on the customers for 20 years. The debt is not really going down. If the county were to take over the authority, then it should actually take over the debt, which is not a popular statement amongst those that have wells. So my question also is, are the authority members going to be paying for future infrastructure needs, first economic development? So the farm store, the County Board of Supervisors paid for that. But how about the County Board of Supervisors decides they don't want to pay for some economic development? So the users would have to pay for that, and then it would incur more debt. So I think before you make these decisions, and Mr. Stats says in this lame duck session, you're right. Two of them are making decisions that are shoving things forward, including the data center and everything else. You see everything's on the fast track because they're leaving, and there's no repercussion to that. So I don't mind saying it in public. There should be a lame duck rule. Thank you, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Mrs. Kupka?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of you who provided comment in person and all of you listening online. So first, Mr. Stats, thank you so much for sharing your concerns with us this evening about the Service Authority, possibility of a merger, about the data center, and with regard to your lame duck rule. So I swore an oath in December of 2019. I swore an oath to serve 4 years, not 3 years, 10 months, and 7 days, which is when the November election will occur. I am not marking time. I never will mark time. The county never sleeps. Ms. Lavelle, thank you very much for your comments, and hopefully we'll get some more information from Ms. Hart about her ability to provide us with some data. And Ms. Jordan, thank you so much for your kind words. It was a great event. I had a lot of fun. You could tell. It was just wonderful to hear the stories. And I want to give special thanks to everyone who volunteered their time and their financial resources to support the event. We had a special recorded message from Mr. Sherman Parker, one of the first 2 African-American students to integrate King George High School. And he was slated to be an in-person guest and keynote speaker for us, and he had a wonderful family surprise occur wherein his grandchildren joined him for his birthday. And so he did make the decision to stay home with his grandchildren. But I need to thank Mr. Chris Clark for helping me. We found that out Thursday afternoon, and Friday morning, he helped me coordinate a Teams meeting with Mr. Parker so that we could record his remarks and he could still greet our guests that evening, almost as good as being there in person. So thanks to Mr. Clark, and thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Kupka. Mr. Stonehill?
Just want to say thanks for everybody that came out in person, folks online. I appreciate having people here for our meetings. It seems like we're getting more and more as time goes on, so I appreciate that. And I don't really have a report, but I do need an appointment, which I have forgotten to do, to reappoint Jane Marvin to the Smoot Library Board for the Dahlgren rep.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you all for that, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehill. I'll just say thank you to everyone who did come out and provide comment. I do appreciate it, and so it's good to hear from the citizens. So on September 20th, there was a King George County Schools community stakeholder breakfast. Dr. Boyd came out and talked about the state of the schools in relation to the other localities that we're in currently in regards to our certification level. So King George was actually at the highest level amongst all the regional localities, including Stafford, Spotsy, Fredericksburg, Caroline. And so that was encouraging to see. There's still some challenges, and probably the biggest one that he identified was chronic absenteeism across all schools. And it sounds like that has been a problem even before COVID occurred. And so trying to address those kinds of challenges in order to keep certification and make sure kids are being educated and prepared to become productive members of society is obviously a very important issue. And so it's good to understand where it's at right now. It didn't fall into the red, it was in the yellow where it's currently at. So, but something to be addressed by the schools. On September 21st, there was a Comrel executive meeting. So this is where we set the agenda for the coming Comrel. The coming Comrel will be actually on November 14th, and it will be at UMW Dahlgren. And so people are always invited to attend. I know all my colleagues are here, always invited if you're available. That evening, we did have a joint work session with the Service Authority to discuss the merger of moving the Service Authority to a Public Works underneath the county. So there was that discussion. I appreciate the Service Authority being there to speak with us. On September 22nd, as Ms. Binder brought up, we did meet with Mr. Tom Inez. And so I won't really belabor that anymore. I think she gave a pretty good overview of the challenges that they're facing. And it was nice to hear what they're dealing with. And yes, trying to poke Dominion. So trying to find the right person in Dominion that will be able to move forward on getting those approvals for the pole installations is obviously something that it would be very good to do. On September 25th, Ms. Terry Rinko had hosted a King George Career Academy Schools focus group. And so the whole point of this was that the schools have been working, the U.S. Department of Education launched a Career Z Challenge to seek innovative ideas from the nation's K through 12 school divisions for developing their dream work-based learning ecosystems. And King George County Schools were selected as one of the 81 out of thousands nationwide to advance to the semifinal phase of the competition. And King George was one of only 17 rural rural divisions that was chosen. So ultimately there will be 10, so 10 of the 81, so 1 in 8 ultimately will be selected to go into phase 3 with the opportunity to receive a $150,000 award, grant award to help make those programs become a reality. They are currently working, and part of that program is to collect new partnerships from a variety of entities. They've formed 27 new ones, including with business and industry, post-secondary stakeholders, local government, federal government, community organizations, nonprofits, and a union apprenticeship program. And they're actively seeking to add new partners. So if anyone is interested from a business perspective of trying to entertain getting into a workforce development relationship with the schools, you can reach out to Ms. Terry Rinko and see if that might be a good fit. On September 26th, we had the joint planning session with the Planning Commission in regards to, and with Berkeley Group for the zoning ordinance overhaul. And so I think all our Planning Commission members and all the work that our staff have gone through to put those together. So hopefully we'll be able to move forward on adopting those in the near future. It's been a long process and it's been going on for a long time. And the last thing I have is my understanding there was another accident along the Route 3 corridor in the Farley Vale Drive through LaGrange Lane area. I've received some emails in the past. I've talked with David Beal, our VDOT representative, about things that could be done in order to address the safety concerns. If there any infrastructure that could be installed, whether it's guardrails or some other infrastructure or some other unique idea, or lowering speed limits, none of those have seemed to be really attractive from a VDOT perspective. So I'm going to ask my colleagues if we could direct staff to reach out to VDOT and request that they perform a safety study as opposed to a speed study of that region, which would include looking into the historical accident situation in that region and see if there's anything that needs to be done in order to address those kinds of issues. So, okay.
Could we add Comorn and Stanley on that?
Is everyone amenable to including Comorn as part of, okay. Mr. Miller, if you could send some correspondence to VDOT and request that a safety study be performed in that region, I would appreciate it.
And Mr. Collins, you asked for Comrail. I didn't hear that.
Comorn.
Comorn. Okay.
Comorn.
Sorry.
Correct?
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Comorn. Yes, sir.
Where the old Perns was.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. That concludes my comments. So we'll bring it back to the board, and I believe we do have a closed session that we're going to start with for this evening.
Mr. Chair, I move that the King George County Board of Supervisors convene in closed session for discussion of a proposed local incentive package for a major economic development project pursuant to the following authorities. 1, Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A6 for discussion and consideration of investment of public funds where competition or bargaining is involved, where if made public initially, the financial interest of the county would be affected. 2, Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A39 for discussion of information subject to the exclusion by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3705.63 for economic development arising from proprietary business information provided pursuant to a promise of confidentiality and/or working papers or other information related to negotiation and bargaining concerning business siting or expansion for which disclosure would adversely affect the financial interests of the county. And 3, Virginia Code Section 2.2-37118 for discussion of specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice. I invite the county administrator, county attorney, assistant county attorney, principal engineer, and representatives of the development prospect as needed because they are deemed necessary and/or their presence will reasonably aid the board in its consideration of one or more of the topics to be discussed pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3712F.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any discussion?
First off, the agenda package did not include all those specifics. There was the closed session was nothing close to that in the agenda package. Number 2, if we're talking about Amazon in there, which I don't know if we are or we're not, but if we are, then I think it's time for bring that out in the open instead of discussing things in non-transparent ways again. There is no reason why we should have that in there. There is no competition. There is no competition for Amazon. They've already got all they're going to get as far as the rezoning and comp plan and so forth and so on. So there, I don't understand where this code section and the other ones that were added would allow us to go into closed session properly and hide stuff from the citizens of King George again.
I do have concern to the added code sections because it is not in my agenda packet, and that concerns me.
Do we have any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Wait a minute. Ms. Lackey, is that proper if it's added on and it's not published for that in the agenda package as is required by law?
If the closed session was advertised, the scope of the closed session was slightly changed. There were two bases, two authorities cited in the agenda package for the meeting, and then additional attendees were contemplated for the meeting. So a third authority was added to the motion script in order to facilitate additional parties to facilitate discussion.
So you say there's no legal challenge to that?
So it is at the discretion of the board whether you wish to have a majority approve the closed meeting motion, but the topic of the closed meeting has not changed. Just an additional authority for the basis of the meeting has been added.
We already know what the vote's going to be on the majority. I'm asking about the legal. So you're saying it's legally what that motion was made? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Chair votes aye, motion carried. We are in closed session. a motion to suspend the closed session and reconvene at the end of the meeting in order to continue the rest of the agenda at this time.
Second.
So I was willing to entertain that motion if someone wanted to make the motion.
So moved.
So moved. Second, okay. We have a motion probably second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We are back in open session. Move on to the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We will start with Ms. Hart as a constitutional officer. So I know we have added you to the agenda, and so we will have you come on now. I believe it's about proration, if I understand properly.
Good evening, board members, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Lackey. We put together a small presentation for you concerning the proration that has been passed to start the first of the year. I'm going to turn it over to Regina, and she's going to give you some good news.
Good evening. I'm before you tonight to request that we stop the vehicle license fee at the time we begin proration, January 2024. I understand your concern regarding the loss of $700,000. Your request was to receive 2 years of historical data on vehicles moving into the county, as well as be able to present alternative revenue streams. While it is possible for me to look back and let you know how many vehicles were on a DMV download for each week for the past 2 years, it is not that easy to let you know the specific type of vehicle and the value or tax it brought to the county. I will need to create queries for that information as well as the vehicles we have deleted for the past 2 years. Due to the timeline for mailing out land use applications, I have not had the time to create those queries. In speaking with many other commissioners last week, it seems that revenue does increase when you transition from non-prorating to prorating, because in most cases, the vehicle is of a higher value. I had provided information in May of 2023 that I had gathered from speaking with other localities that are close in population to King George and had recently transitioned from non-prorating to prorating. All of the localities stated they received an increase in revenue by prorating. Caroline responded with an increase of 5.7%, which was $900,000. Culpeper responded with an increase of 10%. Goochland said they did not have exact figures, but, quote, had a windfall when the locality switched to prorating, end quote. Montgomery County responded with an increase. Prince George said they received an increase with an additional revenue of $1,300,000. It is my understanding that when a vehicle is assessed a license fee in another locality, it should not be assessed a second license fee within that same year. That would mean that my staff would spend a great deal of time researching and contacting other localities from each vehicle that moves into our locality. Since we are not able to hire another full-time person for the position, this would cause my office to not be able to operate as efficiently as I would like. I feel that it will be more beneficial to my office to stop the vehicle license fee at the time we transition to proration. I do have a couple of ideas how to create revenue, perhaps not on a large scale, but over time it may help. Currently, we exempt real estate tax for veterans up to 10 acres per Virginia State Code, which is because we currently had an ordinance in place for exempting elderly and disabled persons. I would like to discuss this further with Kelly at some point to possibly update the ordinance that is in place for elderly, disabled, and veterans to lower the amount of acreage we exempt from 5 instead of 10. Currently, we exempt 10. Prior to coming to this meeting, Judy and I had ran some numbers on 28 of the veteran files and found that if we made that change, it would make a difference of $8,310. I can imagine that it would be much higher if we had checked all accounts. I have figures that show how much the total real estate exemption is for veterans. In 2011, with only 7 veterans, we exempted $1,912. Now in 2023, with 269 veterans, we exempt $802,095.68. That is why I feel we could reduce the number of acres we are exempting. Another avenue is to adjust our depreciation schedule, which is the method we use when J.D. Power or Vessel Valuations does not value vehicles or boats. My recommendation is, if it's not possible to stop the vehicle license fee January 2024 due to budget purposes, then we postpone proration until January 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Puckett. I really appreciate that information and the data. Did anyone have any questions? Okay.
Okay. Would you still like me to work on those queries for you, or does this provide the information you were looking for?
I'll ask my colleagues if they would like to see more precise information.
The only thing I had, you had prepared some things to give us, correct? You had, or is it just this information?
It was just what I read.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because you got a lot of material there, but I do appreciate you looking into it and the thoroughness. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would prefer if we could have a consensus of the board not to mess with the veterans when they're, to leave that out of the mix.
Mr. Chair, I would like to see some more data because I am not okay with taking away benefits from our veterans or our elderly or our disabled. That does not sit well with me.
I only bring it up because you asked for additional revenue avenues, and a lot of other localities do not exempt the full 10 acres.
Ms. Puckett, I appreciate that, but I think that the board is not willing to mess with our elderly, or so you don't have to waste your time with that.
Okay.
Or two.
I would agree. I appreciate you bringing it forth as an option. So, certainly nothing wrong with just bringing it as an option as a way to find more revenue. But I don't really have an appetite for looking down that avenue. But thank you for bringing it forth still. I do appreciate that. And yeah. So in regards to I'm sorry, Ms. Binder.
Are you going to go back to you talking? Is there any way you can give us a rough estimate of maybe what the difference, maybe by looking at a certain amount of people who bought new vehicles, what that amount would have been?
I wouldn't begin to guess. I would rather wait and do the queries for you to try to put something together.
Okay, thank you. And I know our computer system at this moment probably isn't as helpful.
So, Ms. Binder, are you then interested in seeing more concrete numbers?
Well, I agree with the whole getting rid of the vehicle license. I think that is one way we can show our citizens we are going to give them back and absolve them. But I do understand the loss of revenue. I think it can be made up next year when we budget, but I know there's a concern for the rest of this year. But I also understand that we have an old accounting system that is going to be replaced that might cause some of the issues to find the data. So is there a happy medium that we can be assured somewhere we can find that loss in revenue just for the rest of this budget year?
So is that you're not interested in moving forward with asking for more data?
I would like more data, but that's where I'm just justifying. And I know that is a big ask, but I could also hear the citizens going, you're going to lose all that revenue, and how are we going to balance the budget?
So is there an interest in the request to have the numbers run? Okay. I understand that you have a lot of other things as well. Do you have an estimate on how long you think that activity might take?
I began to work on it this evening, so possibly I could have something tomorrow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I could email you guys if that's not possible.
Okay. What?
I don't mind getting the email, but just so everybody knows what the numbers
They
are.
come and presented. Yeah. Certainly we'll take the email. Absolutely. But yeah, it would be great as well to then have it presented as well, so just everyone can see. So yes, I do appreciate it. Thank you. Ms. Kupka, did you have something else?
I would just request consensus to direct staff, once we've obtained some more data or whatever the answer is, to bring this forward on a future agenda for additional discussion.
Sure.
Thank you.
I do apologize for the late arrival, but As I said, my focus was on the timeline for land use, and I knew you guys wanted some kind of information.
Totally understand. I really appreciate what you did bring, though, and I appreciate you willing to go in and get the rest of the information as well. Look forward to seeing it. So thank you for coming out tonight. And thank you for bearing with us this evening so far. All right, we'll move on to County Attorney's Report. Ms. Lackey.
Good evening. The first item I have is a request for direction concerning the lease amendments or other land use agreements that are needed for the additional antenna for the radio system project. So from what I have been able to glean from prior records is that the county administrator, probably the most recent example I can think of is in 2018, approved a tower lease amendment. I was not able to confirm that the board approved or authorized that specific action. And perhaps that's because these leases are in large part or perhaps entirely, they are rent-free leases. As some of you might be aware, on the larger towers in the county that require a special exception, our zoning ordinance requires that they provide space for co-location. So these are under consideration now are, I believe there's 4 in total currently proposed lease agreements or license agreements or different types, they're styled different types of agreements, but basically they are permission by private cell tower operators for use of space for antenna. And both the fire department and sheriff's office have been working very diligently on this project. All these agreements are different, did require some review on my time. So Sheriff Giles has indicated that they are about a month behind schedule of getting this equipment installed because of delays, not just due to my own need to review the agreements, but because we had to get the agreements from the providers as well. So my question for you all is, are you comfortable giving an authorization for the county administrator to sign the agreements when, in my opinion, they're approvable as to form? Or would you like more information? What else can I provide?
I think Mr. Collins was asking if Sheriff Giles had any input to provide on this.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I really don't, unless there's a specific question I could answer. I mean, she's pretty much covered it, that between going back and forth between Kelly and these leases, trying to get the wording right is really slowed things down for us. Because two of the towers are new, which is requiring pads to be poured, shelters to be done, wires to be put in, you know, and the ones that are existing, they still need to be revamped as well, and that's kind of slowing it down. But she pretty much covered everything.
Any other questions? So is everyone amenable to, once Ms. Lackey says that's approved to form by the county attorney, to move forward with having the county administrator sign? Okay. See, head shakes, yes.
And then the second item is brief, but good news for those who are not aware. The closing did occur for the acquisition from Oakland Baptist Church for the relocation of the Dahlgren Fire Station. So that was a long work in progress, and wanted to share some good news with you all.
Okay, I believe we have Ms. Southall with the website redesign project.
Good evening, members of the board. I'm here to give an update on the first phase of the website redesign project, which is the logo concept and tagline development recommendation. Am I doing it wrong? It's not on. Oh, it's not on. We're good, guys. It's my first time. Okay. So brief overview of what we're going to discuss today. Things you've already heard about, like the contract, the committee, seals and logos, and then do an overview of the input that we got in May from the public. And as you see, we'll end with our recommendation of the public vote. So as many of you know, this was a contract with Civic Plus. It was signed in November 2022. There are 3 phases. This is the first phase we're reporting on today, which is the logo development. Once this is determined, we'll be able to do the website refresh and then move on to our mobile app implementation. We had a staff committee that is comprised of myself, Economic Development and Tourism, Fire and Rescue, IT, Library, and the Sheriff's Office. So we tried to get many of our different input from staff on the process. So just a brief overview of seals and logos, the difference between the two and how they work together. So a seal is traditionally a coat of arms. It's typically used by governments and notaries to signify the formality of a document. Think of the traditional seal stamp on a document as you see in the image. And then things evolved and we now have, so we're going to continue to use, as we've mentioned, the seal on our official documents, but as things evolved, the logo developed. And logos are more meant to convey the personality and tone of an entity as it is at that time. And logos can evolve to do the aspirations of what a community or an entity feels for their future. So some examples that you might be familiar with, here's the Army's seal and their logo. They use 2. Seals are meant for their formal documentations, but when you see their commercials, it's the US Army logo. Same for the Navy. Same for the Department of Education. Same for the Department of Defense. Then I get an example of 2 universities we might be familiar with. Something I want to note about Virginia Tech is that, like we talked about, seals stay the same. They're meant to be historical. What you see is about representation of where they started, their establishment, and then Virginia Tech recently changed their logo in the past few years. And so this is something that can evolve and change over time. So here's the University of Virginia. So just a few examples to kind of give you the idea of where we're going with creating a logo for the county since we don't have one. So this is a brief overview of our public input from the May survey. We did 5 questions. It was open for 7 days. It was advertised to nearly 5,000 residents through KG Alert, nearly 400 on Notify Me, which is our website subscription service, and then over 3 social media platforms at the time. We had nearly 300 participants. We asked 5 different questions, like I mentioned, unique features that represent the town, the county, excuse me, and then what characteristics define King George community, what describes the county means to you, and then the short phrase. This is in red because this was meant to elicit the tagline responses, so this will not be in the overview of the statistics that I'm about to go over, but I will bring it back up later. And then the last question was, what is your favorite place to visit in King George County? So how was this quantitative data made into qualitative data? So all of the responses were read through, and then there were similarities that kind of popped out. And so then they were categorized into different categories, and then those were coded and then made into the statistics that I will be going over. There is a category that is the not applicable category, and that just means that either the response was not what we were trying to receive from the question, because all of those questions were meant to elicit some type of response, so they might have been off topic. So that's kind of where that category is. Overall, that averaged about 15% of responses across the 5 questions, which is pretty much anticipated and not statistically significant. So the first question, again, something to note about this process is that, yes, we had nearly 300 responses, but as you go on, not everybody filled out every question, so the responses will go lower. And then something to also note is that some responses were coded more than once. So as you can see in this example, 295 responses, but it elicited 438 codes. So someone might have said that they really liked the nature of the county, but they also said they like that we have our rivers. So that one would have had more than one code. So just to note that, so that those percentages will not equal 100% because there's more than one code. So just to note that. Anyways, the overview for this question was that it mostly said that we loved our nature and that we loved our rivers and waters here in King George County. So to kind of cross-reference that that coding worked, I then took all the responses for that question and put them and made a word cloud. And so here you can see whatever the largest words are the words that were used the most. So rural, rivers. So that's how you can see that the coding essentially worked. So that's the overview for this question. Same for this question. The biggest thing was friendly, small community. So that would then also translate in the word cloud. Friendly is the biggest word. Same for the next question. What does King George mean to you? It's home. It has family and friends. It's peaceful, quiet, and safe. Same thing here. Home, community, family are the biggest words. And then for this question, the same concept. Parks and Recreation was the most used word, and you'll see that with I went too fast. With Caledon here, Caledon State Park is the most used on here, so people really like Caledon. So that's an overview of those statistics, and that influenced us to develop the logo concept. And so from those responses, we really saw that it was mostly based on nature, the rivers, so we wanted to somehow project that into the logo. And so we basically gave that information to Civic Plus. Their design team came back with in total 10 concepts in grayscale, and then developed the 2 concepts in color that we had the public vote on. Here are the first ones. So this basically, you can tell they went more with the eagle concept over the river concept. We gave them feedback that we wanted to kind of soften the logo some more. And so we got these concepts. And then ultimately the committee decided to go with the lower 2. And then here's the development of those editing. So we had these renditions, and then the final one I'll show in just a second. But same for the KGBA one. These were the different renditions that we went through. And then these were the ones we landed on. So basically, how did we do the tagline development? So back to question number 4 that I mentioned. We had an initial brainstorm meeting with the committee on May 30th, looking at those responses. And then once we reviewed them, we decided we wanted to take a pause on that and wait until the logos were developed and see how we could get those responses to kind of fit with the logo to tell a cohesive story. So then we had that second meeting on September 8th. Those taglines from the committee were grouped by similarities because, as you can tell, there's going to be a lot of repetition. And then they were narrowed down to 6 different ones. And then the public, we had the committee vote on it, and those are the ones we sent to the public. So there were over 27 different ones that staff came up with based on the responses. Some of them are direct quotes from the responses that we got from the public. Some of them are also just renditions of the same kind of concept. And then once those were grouped together, we landed on these 6. And then the committee voted on these 6. And that's where you can see that option 2 and option 3 were the ones that were most popular among the committee. And then that's where we landed these 2 being sent to the public to vote on, where the rivers flow and community grows, and then home between the rivers. Then we just had our public vote. It ended on Sunday evening. This was open September 20th through October 1st. It was advertised again to nearly 5,000 KG Alert subscribers, over 1,000 different Notify Me subscribers, and then to 4 different social media platforms at that time. And we had about 1,500 responses. And of those 2, again, logo concepts, the data showed that the public preferred logo concept 2, which is the KGBA logo. And then of the tagline options, the public voted again for option 2, which is home between the rivers. So now it leads to my recommendation to adopt what the public voted on, which is KGBA logo concept and the home between the rivers tagline. And then in conclusion, this is just open for the board to adopt a logo that the public has voted on so that staff can then begin the website redesign process. And now I just open it up to questions.
Thank you, Ms. Southall. I appreciate the presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Southall?
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you. Great research and a great presentation. And thanks for all your hard work on it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
actually like the other tagline, but the public has spoken, so, because I like the community grows part, so.
So before I mentioned about the colors. So you showed Virginia Tech and their colors is what colors they use. And UVA is what colors they use. But that's not the colors King George uses.
Yes, so King George has the colors behind you in the seal, the red, the navy, and the goldish brown. But there are other examples in those ones that aren't just university based, where they don't stick with their colors. It's all the way back at the beginning. So Department of Defense, they did a lighter blue. It's all monochromatic. Department of Education, it's a brighter green. It's close to the same blue. The Navy went completely opposite. They went with a true traditional Navy for their logo versus what's in their seal. The Army stuck with the yellow, but went with black. And so I mean, it's variable. But one thing we did do that I was conscious of in the logo that we do have, that both options have blue in it. We wanted to kind of stick with that richness of the rivers and stuff. We just kind of lighten them a bit. So that is one of the things that we tried to keep with.
Have any other questions? All right. I'll entertain a motion if anyone would like to make one.
Take a swing at a motion. I'll make a motion to adopt the tagline and the logo concept that has been presented in the public, voted on.
Second.
We have a motion probably seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, we have Davenport. Mr. Laux.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, nice to see you all this evening. So we've got a handout. And so, Mr. Chair, members of the board, was asked to come this evening to give a little bit of an overview and a discussion. Same presentation gave to the Service Authority Board earlier this evening for anyone that was sort of present or in attendance for that. But it's really dealing with a topic that's been talked about for probably a year or 2 years thereabouts, and that's this topic of taking the Service Authority, which is obviously the long-standing entity that provides water and sewer service in the county, and transitioning that to a water and sewer utility enterprise fund under the umbrella of the county. And so we'll flip through the slides here, and certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'll try not to dwell too much on the background. I think the board and probably members of the audience are familiar here, but our service authority obviously provides water and sewer service to the county, not the entire county, a portion of the county, certainly those residents. It's been in existence since about, I think, 1992, so we're roundabouts 30 years of its existence. I think Mr. Collins referenced at the outset when it was established, it was really established by virtue of having to take over some existing private neighborhood wells, et cetera, and make sure those were run in accordance with regulatory requirements, as you would expect. And so that's kind of the background of it. As we look across the state, we really see a mixture of counties like King George that have service authorities and counties like King George that have water and sewer utility departments. So you really see both situations in existence, and both can function very successfully. In the early years, I think this has been referenced, by virtue of being such a small system and a startup system, the general fund had to support and subsidize the operations. That's going back into the 90s. In and around 2008, as the pressures on the general county, I mean, the general fund became great. Certainly we had that recession. There really was a need to have the water and sewer system support itself and have revenues whereby the users of the system, then again, there's only a portion of the county, were fully paying for it, which is very much typical for a water sewer utility, whether it's in Virginia or across the country. We call that one of the best practices, whereby the users of the system are paying for the system. And so in and around that 2008 time period, that plan was put in place. It worked through a variety of steps. And we've really been about almost at this point 15 years, not quite, whereby the service authority has been paying for itself, like you would expect of a business, whereby the revenues of that system are paying for the operations and the debt service associated with running the system. Importantly, within all of that is that even as the service authority transitioned to that point where it was no longer reliant upon revenues from the general fund, the county and the Board of Supervisors and its strong credit ratings still provided what we call a moral obligation backstop to the outstanding debt. And so that, if you want to use a personal finance corollary, is a little bit like co-signing on a loan for someone. And that really was put in place as a requirement by the state, meaning the Virginia Resources Authority, is sort of a credit backup behind the existing debt. So the Board of Supervisors and the county has not sent dollars over the service authority, but there still is that backing, that support behind the debt in a what we call moral obligation. Again, kind of like a co-signer on the loan that supports the service authority's ability to go out and borrow money for new capital, which it's had to do over the years. So we give all of that as a little bit of a brief background. We know certainly with the joint meeting of the board, supervisors with the service authority, as well as some of these past discussions, there's this discussion of bringing the authority under the auspices of the county as a utility enterprise system that would be fully self-supporting. So we just want to give some observations, certainly answer any questions that the board may have. I think some just general observations. Certainly we know you so well in terms of King George, and we appreciate that. You're a rapidly growing county, rapidly evolving in that sense. And so that water and sewer infrastructure is going to be really important to how you think about future development, where you think about it and how you want to think about it. And so we think that's an important sort of level of cohesion in the sense of being able to tie together some of those decisions with respect to how you grow with how the water and sewer is operated and run throughout the county. Another important aspect, and we've seen this the last couple of years, the county's had several very good, excuse me, the service authority, the county too, but service authority in this sense has had several very good financial years, and that's been driven by a couple different things. One of those is growth that we've gotten in terms of new connections. And so that has certainly helped the bottom line of the service authority. We're going to see that in the next couple pages in terms of a graphic. The trick to that new connection related revenues is very difficult to predict. It depends upon economic conditions. It depends upon people coming and building new things in the county and certainly the board approving those things. And so it is very, very difficult to predict what exactly those revenues are going to look like. And so part of our thinking here, as we think about what does the future of the water and sewer utility, whether it's a service authority or an enterprise fund, is making sure we're being very smart about how we think about that future growth. We've got less visibility than we've had the last several years in terms of new residential development, at least as far as I'm aware. So we just want to keep that in mind. It creates less certainty when we think about what the revenue is going to be in the future. So we just need to kind of build that level of flexibility into the plan. So again, in terms of just some big picture goals and objectives, all in accordance with thinking about this potential concept, there's a variety of different things that we think, and Ms. Lackey can echo this, would need to happen if indeed the Service Authority was transitioned to a counter enterprise fund. And so we've listed some of those there. I won't go through them in great gory detail, but I think it's suffice to say there's a lot of details that would still need to be worked out over the next several months if indeed this process were to go forward. You've got the day-to-day operational things, that's not our expertise. The permit and regulatory side of things, that's more on Ms. Lackey and others. The legal in terms of also Ms. Lackey and the bond counsel, but the final piece there in terms of number 4, the financial and debt related, that's what I'll spend a little more time talking about and certainly answer any questions that you have over the next couple slides. So again, just a little bit of background. We think it's helpful to paint a bit of a picture. Thank you, Mr. Dines. So as we talk about the Service Authority, we've talked about the fact that it's not been reliant on support from the general fund. So the tax rate and the taxpayers are not subsidizing the Service Authority with any direct transfers over, again, to the water and sewer utility. So it's been self-supporting. We put in place the last 5-year plan really in about 2019. And what you see as you look at that graph is the gold line there is the revenues of the authority. The bars are the expenditures broken out between operational expenditures and debt service. And so from 2014 to 2019 had a number of very lean years. Not relying on the general fund, but still very, very lean years in terms of the operations. As we get to fiscal year 2020 and beyond, that's when the most recent 5-year financial plan was put in place. We've had 3 very solid years, and so the Service Authority is in much stronger financial shape. Here we are in 23 than it was several years ago, and so we've built up a much nicer base. We've got much better reserves, been able to raise rates at an incremental level. So in terms of a planning position and thinking about what does the future look like, the Service Authority is in a good position to be thinking about the future. It doesn't mean there's not challenges. Certainly there's always going to be challenges. But in terms of where we sit right now and wanting to maybe take a fresh look at things, understand what that looks like, given the operational needs, given the capital needs, given other pressures, we're in a good position to start that process. So on page 7, we'll take just a page here, but certainly something that's talked about a lot in the context of the Service Authority, and this is its existing debt. And so a corollary I made at the prior meeting, and I'll make it again here, is when you think about the Service Authority's existing debt, maybe think about it like your personal finances in your home. If you've been fortunate enough to own or buy a home at some point, almost certainly you bought it with a mortgage, and so the two go hand in hand. If you have the home, you have the mortgage. You may not love the mortgage, but the mortgage and the home go hand in hand. That's really what was used to purchase that home, because again, it's a long-term asset that you're going to live in for a long time. The Service Authority has long-term capital assets, pipes and pumps and things that will benefit users over a long time period. And so the way you pay for that in the water and sewer realm is a combination of cash funding and debt funding, and this is the debt funding component of that. So outstanding right now is about $21 million. I'll round up a little bit, about $22 million in outstanding principal. It's all fixed rate. The payments are known, so as interest rates, you see that in the news, as interest rates increase, our interest rates are not changing here. This is all fixed. Current payments are about $1.4 million. You see that at the top of the page. It does grow over the next couple of years. It's not a surprise. That was all part of the plan from 2019 to kind of carve some time to allow revenues to grow on an incremental annual basis, to allow us to kind of build up some reserves. So as we need to take on a number of these large capital projects, we've got a stronger financial footing to do that with. I mentioned earlier this concept of a moral obligation pledge. And again, I'll use that corollary to personal finance. It really is the Board of Supervisors co-signing, but not sending any money over, not making any payments, not subsidizing the authority, but just co-signing. That really has been a requirement of the state program, the Virginia Resources Authority, that has been essentially the only lender to the Service Authority, with one exception, for a number of years. So we see that in terms of the existing profile. It's sort of been baked into the numbers, but just wanted to point that out. It's paid down annually, so you see there in that column, the principal column, there is principal that is paying down each and every year, similar to a mortgage, whereby you're making your payments each and every year. The principal balance is declining. And so that is all sort of built in. It's not like a credit card, so to speak, whereby that balance can kind of get run up. This is very methodical, very much a known quantity when we're doing the budget, when you're doing the multi-year planning. And so there's that component that is out there, certainly a large component of how we'd be thinking about things. And if indeed the county and Board of Supervisors and the Service Authority wanted to move forward, I think we've got an opportunity to look at this, look at the picture, look at how it's paid in terms of the existing debt, re-look at what the right debt structure is. If indeed the Service Authority would go to the county, I don't see that there's nothing in that equation that makes this debt go away. So just for full disclosure, that process would not in some way make the debt go away, but it does give you as a county an ability to re-look at it. What's the right amount to have? There's some things you could pay off, or there's some things you could rework in the context of what the future is with both the revenues and the expenditure side of things. So wherein it's fixed and it's not moving right now, you would have an ability to look at that in greater detail. But importantly, the way we would want to do that is in such a way that it's not going to impede the general county and its need to make investments in the schools and the fire stations and the other things that we've been talking about and moving forward with. And so that's a very, very important concept, because we're really talking about both of those simultaneously here right now. One of the primary reasons we want to make sure that the water and sewer utility, just use that term, is self-supporting and is not reliant, whether it's operations or it's debt, not reliant on the general fund, is that gives us the most capacity possible to go make investments for schools and fire stations and other things. If indeed our debt service for the utility was not paid by the users of the system and it was paid for by the county, we'd basically have to go add this debt profile with our existing county debt profile and kind of lump those two things together. And as you think about the presentations we've made over the last couple of months and those policies that we have that allow us to get the best possible credit ratings when we're borrowing on the county side, we would suddenly be gumming up those policies in a very substantial way and limiting our ability to go make investments, again, for the general county things, whether it's the preschool, the fire station, the other things that are talked about. And so it's a rationale. It's not just a, call it an industry best practice, but there's a very practical reason that we want to keep the water and sewer utility paying for itself, and that we know that we're, I say we collectively, moving forward with things on the general county side, and make sure that we keep as little pressure on the general county as possible, knowing those other needs that are being taken on there, other priorities, and trying to keep that balance. Where in the school system, the fire station, certainly benefiting the entire county, the utility system does just have a small portion of of the county populace that is a user. There can be nuances in there at various points. We talked about in the prior bidding, Ms. Bender, economic development. So there can be nuances within all of that. I think we'd want to look at all of that if indeed this process went forward. But I think importantly at the core, the baseline assumption we want to make is that the water and sewer utility is going to continue paying for itself and the users of the system will pay for itself. And again, reason for that is not just that it's an industry best practice, but we want to make sure that we're protecting and insulating the general fund, because there's a lot of things that we know by virtue of action the board's taken that the general fund is looking to and want to take on. So as we get to page 8, in terms of just some final considerations here, we just make some broad observations. It's very common to have a water and sewer system in Virginia that is a county water and sewer utility authority. Very, very common. It is separately accounted for. If you go look at an audit of, you can go look at Spotsylvania, you can go look at Henrico, you can go look at Chesterfield. Any number of different counties have a entirely separate water and sewer utility department. It's called an enterprise fund. It's accounted for separately in the audit. The finances are entirely separate. And I think if indeed this would move forward, you'd want to be doing the same thing. That would be our recommendation, at least, to have that, again, be an enterprise fund. All of the dollars for that enterprise fund are accounted for separately. They're tracked separately. They're not commingled with general tax revenues of the county. And I think hopefully we've kind of outlined why we want to do that. But that is A, commonplace, and B, something that that would be our recommendation if indeed this process were to go forward. We talked a little bit at the bottom of the page in terms of the existing debt. I think what we'd really like to do over the balance of this year, and again with the board's collective blessing here into next year, is take a very good, hard, deep look at what the finances of the water and sewer utility look like. The last plan was set in basically 2018. The world has changed since then. You've got a lot of new things going on. The magnitude of the capital needs by virtue of regulatory requirements have gotten a lot bigger. There's also been a fair amount of grant funding that's come in. That's a good thing. And so where that balance strikes and where the puzzle pieces need to fit together, regardless of whether this continues to be a service authority or whether it is a utility enterprise fund, we think a fresh, good look at the overall finances of the water and sewer utility is just a healthy thing to do. It's been about 5 years since last time, kind of run through that 5-year program. We think that makes a lot of sense. The other thing I think you probably want to do is to go take a look at the rates and charges, meaning the user rates, make sure they're fair, make sure they're equitable, make sure they're on par with what other people are doing, make sure the various tiers within that rate structure are all up to date. Those haven't been updated for some time. And so again, I think regardless of the path of a service authority or a utility, I think you'd want to be doing that kind of multi-year planning again. So with that, just broad brush next steps. These are really entirely up to the board. And I know Ms. Lackey talked in the last meeting about outlining a process. There'd be a lot of work to do, a lot of details to be ironed out. It's not without precedent. So we just kind of laid out some broad next steps. I think most importantly, really starting over the course of the fall and the winter on the financial side of the house would be, I think, what we would be doing with your blessing. And then certainly on the permitting and legal side of the things, we defer to Mr. Miller, Ms. Lackey, et cetera. But I think the overall idea is if indeed this goes forward, kind of work its way through so that by the time you get to July 1 of next year, so start a new fiscal year, we kind of have a full refresh, I think would be the goal to kind of work through that if indeed that's something the board and the county want to work forward with. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, additional comments, clarifications. Be happy to take that.
Thank you, Mr. Lax. Did anyone have any questions?
I just want to thank you because you answered a lot of my questions, but I do appreciate in coming and giving this overview. But I wanted to reiterate to the board also what I brought up in the last meeting, that part of this process, we need to have a strategic plan, you know, for rolling into something like this into our county. We need to have a strategic plan to make sure that we're on the right path, and that would include the financing that you were talking about and restructuring. We need to have a timeline we stick to and an organizational structure to make sure that we're doing this right. And then the last thing is, and I remembered what I forgot in the last meeting, was to look at muni billing and whether we could bring it back to the county and take that burden off the citizens, because there is a cost every year to muni billing. And that maybe now with the new accounting system and the better structure we are doing, to bring it back in-house. So all those are things, because I want to make sure we lock in to make sure we do the process and not forget any steps.
Mr. Chair. I would add in answering Ms. Bender's question about muni building, that is the plan I believe that the board of directors has looked at, is once you complete the AMI project, the automatic meter reading, then you'll be in a better position to assess that and bring that back into the county. I know that the treasurer and I have had conversations. I think there is a desire to recapture that. So yes.
Mr. Collins?
How you doing, Carl? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Enjoy your vacation.
I think.
Mr. Rose was here last time. He said you were on vacation.
Yes, yes.
He wasn't telling me the truth, huh? He just didn't want to come. Anyhow.
Not the case.
So the $23 million in debt
Sir.
is the big sticking point. So like I mentioned earlier in my comments, Hop Yard paid for that system. The developers paid for the system at Hop Yard, but now the citizens are paying the debt service fee, just as others are paying the debt service fee for something that they didn't create. We talk about county services, and I mentioned earlier about I'm paying, if I'm on a service authority, I'm paying for the infrastructure to get it to, and I gave the example to the fire department so they can fill up their tanker and take it to Mr. Granger's house, who has a well. So I'm paying for the infrastructure for that, where every other county department, you're taxed, everyone's taxed for that. So you take a little bit of fairness out of the people that are burdened with this ridiculous amount of debt. So there needs to be a plan either to pay the debt down at a more vigorous rate or something else. But it's not. But when you talked earlier about on par with the rates are we're the highest, one of the highest rates in the state of Virginia. So they are already the people, including myself, are already. I pay $150 for debt service fee. $150, which is basically another tax to me that others don't pay. And so if the service authority is going to run a line to somewhere for some business, the users are paying for that infrastructure. So it doesn't seem to be fair of how things are structured at this time.
I think what I'd say, Mr. Collins, is you've just laid out, and there's more, you've just laid out some of the tricky variables that I think are why you want to take a really good, hard, fresh look at the water and sewer system. There's some basic core, call it principles, that it's not just us or me or David or whomever, it's just kind of, industry practice. So there's some of those that should serve as the basis for how it's set up. But there's certainly going to be nuances, there's going to be unique aspects to any of it. And so I think what you just laid out is a number of those variables and part of the puzzle that we think needs a fresh look, given how much has changed in your county if you really take it all the way back to 1992, so much has changed in your county from 92, and your rate structure is still kind of the same. You bring up some little nuances in terms of maybe fire protection. It really begs for a good, fresh reset on all those different things. The debt certainly is a big component of it. And I think, go back to my prior example, whereby through this process, with your blessing, we'll run through all of it. I don't see the debt going away, but I see ways that we can work with it, ways we can maybe mitigate it, maybe some ways we can pay it down. We need to look at all those variables. Don't have all the answers right now, but certainly that's all, sort of on our mind. But to your point on the debt too, the flip side to that is, as we go forward with, on the preschool and the fire station side of things, we know already that as we take on that, roughly $42 million over the next couple years, that's going to really push up against some of the county's debt ratios by itself. And so what we have to guard against when we think about all this is, if we're doing the preschool and the fire station and other general county needs, which there's going to be others, we've got to make sure we're sort of watching both sides of the house. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why when we think about the service story side of things, because there's a small portion of the populace, relatively speaking, that is a user of the system, and thus is using the capital, the pipes and the pumps that $24 million paid for, that's kind of the primary rationale. So it makes sure we have as much capacity as possible to go do the other things that are very easily definable as county in the aggregate, the preschool, the fire station, et cetera. So hopefully that's helpful, but certainly it's a puzzle and a bunch of different variables that we'd want to be looking at.
Any other questions for Mr. Laux? Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You as well. The King George County Board of Supervisors will now hold a public hearing that has been properly advertised to receive public input regarding training facility text amendment. I will first ask for the staff report. I will then open the floor for public comment. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker in order to afford everyone an opportunity to speak. Please state your name and address before you comment. Upon completion of the public comment, I will bring the matter back to the board for consideration. The board may or may not take action tonight depending on information received during public comment. Floor is open. Oh, I'm sorry. No, start with staff report. Apologies, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good to be with you again tonight. So case number 2307Z03 is a proposed amendment to the King George County zoning ordinance to allow and define training facilities in the limited agricultural district A1 as a use permitted only by special exception. These are proposed amendments to section 1.9, definitions of terms, and 2.3.3, those are the A1 uses permitted only by special exception. If you recall back to your June 6th meeting, you directed staff to amend the ordinance to expand the definition of a private school with the intent to facilitate an educational use that would involve safety, security, and survivability training to avoid and mitigate risks. Following this direction, and upon reviewing similar terms proposed in the draft ordinance overhaul, it was suggested that a separate definition rather than an expansion of the current might be more appropriate to facilitate this specialized training use. Additionally, accessory uses that are not permitted in the ordinance need to be addressed in the definition. These can include things like defensive driving tracks or the discharge of firearms. Moving forward, on September 12th, the King George County Planning Commission held a public hearing to discuss the proposed training facility. Commissioners voted to forward the case to the board with a recommendation of denial. Not sure if anybody had the availability to watch the meeting, but just kind of an overall summary, the commissioners were in favor of the proposal, but they felt like they didn't have enough time to review all aspects of the case before it was forwarded to you. Staff brought the proposal to the commissioners multiple times before they scheduled the public hearing. Unfortunately, this case had to take a back seat to those industrial rezonings. Section 15.2-2285 of the Virginia Code gives the Planning Commission 100 days to make its recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. This deadline would have expired following the September 12th meeting date, and there was not enough time to meet the advertisement deadlines for a special hearing. Therefore, they felt that they were being pushed up against the deadline. The first proposed amendment will be to Section 1.9, Definitions of Terms, to define a training facility as an establishment which primarily provides safety, security, or survivability training for the purposes of educating students to attain or maintain a public safety, private security, or high-threat civil or foreign service vocation. This definition shall be construed as being inclusive of all buildings, structures, grounds, and uses that are associated with the organization of the training facility, including but not limiting to administrative buildings, cafeterias, classrooms, dormitories, staff housing, storage buildings, and accessory uses such as driving tracks, handgun ranges, and other similarly used structures. The second proposed amendment will be to Section 2.3.3, Limited Agricultural District Regulations permitted only by special exception, to allow training facility as a use permitted only by special exception. With that, we can end on the recommendation. We have two here for you tonight. First of all, the King George County Planning Commission recommends that the Board of Supervisors deny case number 2307Z03, amendment to the King George County zoning ordinance to allow and define training facilities in the limited agricultural district A1 as a use permitted only by special exception. The second, from the Department of Community Development staff, recommending that the board approve case number 2307Z03. Staff brings this recommendation to the board because, as proposed, this use would only be permitted by a special exception. This would allow the board to review each application by a case-by-case basis and can even impose special restrictions to mitigate the impact. These could be as simple as setbacks or screening, or even up to the hours of operation. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Stewart before we open the floor for public comment? Ms.
I
Bender.
don't, but I do have some questions for Ms. Lackey.
Okay.
Do you want me to ask them now, or wait till after the public comment?
Let's wait after public comment.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. In that case, we will now open the floor for public comment in regards to this public hearing.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Chris Giles, and I live at 9004 Clare Street, King George. I'm speaking at this public hearing in favor of the text amendment. If this amendment is approved, this will open many doors for training for my office. As it stands right now, most of the training we conduct is outside of the county. This costs my deputy time, traveling back and forth to the training, not to mention wear and tear on our issued vehicles. This safety training facility that is requesting this amendment can support some of the training that would require us to leave the county. For instance, the qualifying range we use is a private in King George County. It's a private range in King George. This range is nearing the end of life due to the homeowner getting up in the years. When the end of life comes for us to use the range, we'll have to seek out another range, most likely outside the county. We may even have to rent a range at a cost outside the county. The safety training facility has agreed to allow us to use the facility if there are no scheduling conflicts with the safety training that they are providing. The safety training facility will provide us with an area for driver training, classrooms for classroom training as well, and a much needed qualifying range, which we will need in the very near future. And not to mention an area for our ATV and our side-by-side training that we would have to go to private property now to be able to utilize to train in the vehicles. So I'm asking you to vote in favor of the amending zoning ordinance, section 1.9 and 2.3.3, to allow the defining training facilities in the limited agricultural district A1 as a use permitted only by special exceptions. Thank you.
Good evening, Ken Stroud, 5405 Kings Highway, King George, Virginia. So I'd like to approach tonight to speak in favor of the amendment I think that having the ability to use agricultural lands for our training is advantageous to the county and its citizens. Actually, I think that it should be expanded beyond just the training that was presented tonight, because it affords farmers and ranchers the ability and alternative means to of funding that now with property taxes going up, the cost of things going up, and you've got farmers and ranchers that have a lot of land, but they're limited in the ways that they can create revenue based off of it. And this allows them not only to use it for the purpose they're using for it today, but also to have alternative means of producing revenue, which again would help the county. And it is by special exception. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Scott Simon. My address is Post Office Box 1841 in Dahlgren. I am currently with the King George Sheriff's Office as a part-time deputy. I retired about 2 years ago. I became a firearms instructor back in the year 2000, and back then ranges were tough to come by. We were using a range over in near the Carmel Church exit. I think it was owned by the U.S. Postal Service, and then I think Richmond City took it over, and now I think Hanover's taken it over. There's another range available possibly for us over in Essex County near the Tappahannock Airport. Outside of that, those are the only ranges that I know that we would possibly have access to. We lost the Carmel Church range back in 2006, and it just so happened, just got lucky that Mr. Morgan stepped forward and let us use his range. We have been on his range since 2007. All right, so we're coming up on 20 years. Back in 1997, we had 16 deputies to shoot, to train. Back in 2007, we had 39 deputies. As of last year, we were up over 50, 55, I think. So we are expanding. Since 2007 till now, we're up 20% deputies. We've got a new courthouse going in. We've got more people to train. We need a dedicated range. It's going to save time, resources outside the county, like the sheriff said. We could use a dedicated range. So I support the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Dines, do we have anyone online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Did anyone receive any correspondence to be entered into the record for this public hearing? Okay, then in that case, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for discussion and consideration. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to approve case number 2307Z03, amendment to the King George County zoning ordinance to allow and define training facilities in limited agricultural districts, A1, as use permitted only by special exception.
Second.
A motion properly seconded.
Friendly amendment. Could I suggest that we move adoption of the resolution for the case number?
Okay, we have a motion to amend. Do you have a second to that? I'll second it.
You have to adopt the resolution.
Correct.
To do this.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so questions, Mrs. Vender?
I had some questions, and this is why I'm asking this. So first of all, I think this idea is an awesome idea, but knowing that I'm the supervisor from Shiloh and we had a campground that came in and there was a shooting range and there was a lot of discussion on it. I've had citizens talk to me, not in email, but talk to me. So I promised I would ask a few questions. So to keep my promise, I am going to ask these few questions, clarifying questions, just so it's on public record. One of the questions that was asked in the subject, and why was industrial zoning not thought of? And I'm going to give an example of some of these properties, even though they, to the outside observer, look like agricultural, they're not really ag anymore. They were former gravel pits that in industrial zoning. So that's one question I wanted to ask, and Ms. Lackey would be able to answer that for me.
So I think that if I recall correctly, the referral to the Planning Commission specifically targeted agricultural, although there were Planning Commission members during the discussion who were they were kind of split. Some of them were unsure, and then some of them were like, well, let's expand this to industrial and possibly other things. There was a comment by at least one planning commissioner that industrial property is pretty limited in the county and that it probably has a better, highest and best use than this particular specialized use. So in the end, as Mr. Stewart noted, they couldn't reach a consensus on a recommendation. So the ultimate recommendation was denial. So by way of answering your question, that was a thought that had occurred to the Planning Commission, but they did not ultimately make that recommendation.
And then the one other thing and this came up from some citizens that lived near the property that was, going to be the campground, that was the Cameron Hill Golf Course. They just wanted to make sure that this covered that not anybody could just set up a shooting range after, for whoever applies to it. And it's just mean like a certified. I know that the one party that's interested, theirs is going to be top notch, but what about the ones behind it?
Right, so there was internal discussion of the original concept was to add this as an additional use for school, but we thought school, has a more, in common usage has a lot more expanded uses. So as you see, this definition was an attempt to provide a class of like situated types of activities. So private security, public safety, and then civil or foreign service vocation. So it's specific to that activity. And you'll note this definition as drafted, it's limited to handgun ranges as well. So it's not all weapons. So those were further attempts to kind of limit this so that it would hopefully be something manageable. As Mr. Stewart mentioned, you'll look at things on a case-by-case basis, but you got to treat applications similarly. So that's why this definition is drafted in such a way that it provides for certain types of uses, a multiple type of uses, but it's also limited.
I appreciate you answering that, and I know at least the one applicant that probably will be utilizing this, what they're trying to do I think is really good, especially for those that serve in the military and those that serve us overseas in support of our country. And it's important that we take care of them and their families. Thank you.
Mr. Collins, do you have something?
So my understanding, it's not a gun range. It's a training facility, and the firearms is just an ancillary use. So it's not like it's not like a gun range like the Cameron Hills one, where it'd just be a gun range. This is a training facility. From my understanding, it's a training facility for the use of the folks that are attached to folks that are assigned overseas, family members, to help them in situations that happened overseas, such as automobiles and what to do in a motor vehicle accident, familiarization with firearms, and other, I think they're going to have a school also for academic reasons. So there's not really a gun range, and my understanding is the sheriff will be able to use that gun range so they won't have to have, so it benefits the county, and the folks over in that, I think that Ms. Carter, did you not talk to all the neighbors?
Can we have somebody else come up and clarify?
So we're not discussing a particular application, but if it would help, help inform the board about how this might be applied, I think that's reasonable to ask for.
Ms. Carter, if you'd like to come up.
Comment.
Hi, I'm Linda Carter, and I work for Port Graham. We are hoping this text amendment goes through so that we could present our application to you. We're ready to go. We've done a ton of work. We've addressed every single comment that was asked or that was said at the Planning Commission meeting. I wish they would have called on me because I think I could have tapered down the different rabbit holes they were going around, but that wasn't the time. This is the time to just talk about the text amendment. But Mr. Collins, you are correct. We are proposing, and in our application, you will see every single aspect of our elements spelled out in detail, and we've actually put special conditions on ourselves so to hope that we'll address any or mitigate any future potential questions that you all may have. Does that kind of give you an answer, or do you?
I appreciate that because I know you've spoken to me about that. You'll even have a limit on the time that it'll be open.
Yeah, I think that at the time that we do present our application, we are having a pre-application meeting. We need to schedule a pre-application meeting, and then we'll be ready to submit right away, and you will have all those answers spelled out from time it's going to be open, when it's not going to be open. I have spoken to every single neighbor that, except for two older, the Smiths that are in Mississippi, but they're caretaker of their property. I have spoken to him several times, and he relays messages to them. But I have spoken to Miles Hastings. I have spoken to Brandon Walden. We have a gun range designer that does all federal gun range designs. He has spoken to Brandon Wallen. I've spoken to Senator Warner's chief of staff. I think I've covered all the bases with all the neighbors that are directly adjacent to the property, and even some that maybe aren't directly adjacent but near the property, and answered any questions that they would have had, and made some adjustments to our application based on comments they had as well. So we're wanting to be good neighbors in the community. We want to give to the community, and hopefully when our project is presented, this is a little premature, you will see that reflected in such a manner.
Thank you for coming up.
Okay, we have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we have adoption of design build guidelines. Ms. Lackey.
So you will recall that a few meetings ago, I mentioned in my county attorney's report that there was possible interest on the part of staff of having design build guidelines adopted by the board. Design build is a method of procurement, sometimes called an alternative form of procurement, where instead of hiring an engineering or architectural firm, they complete the design, then you do a second bid process for the construction. That's the traditional process. Design build is when you hire one firm or possibly even a team, but you still just have one contracting party who's going to perform that entire scope of work, both designing or engineering the building and constructing it. The state code does allow this, and in fact, there's a placeholder in the county's purchasing ordinance that has a passing reference to the design build procurement method, but to my knowledge, the county has never adopted design build guidelines. The guidelines are pretty narrowly constrained by the statute. Says they have to be consistent with guidelines adopted by the Commonwealth Secretary of Administration. I drafted proposed guidelines to follow those guidelines of the state, which were last updated in 2020. Although I included a two-step process for smaller projects. Sometimes design build is thought of as only appropriate for big projects, but there also could be small things like a small renovation where there's a design component. You need somebody to submit plans and do a small renovation. And sometimes it's more cost-effective or efficient to have that work performed by a single firm or even a joint venture to do that work. I think possibly the fueling depot might be a good prospect for this type of method. So staff is interested in adoption of these guidelines for some near-term projects. And if you have any questions, I'm ready for those questions.
Do we have any questions from Ms. Lackey about the design build guideline proposal?
Yes, I'll have a couple. This would not preclude using construction manager at risk, right? This is just an extra tool.
Correct. So this is both construction management at risk and design build are kind of the two main alternative procurements, but you could use either. There has to be a decision made to use either of those. And I believe in both of those instances, you have to have an engineering consultant or in-house person as part of the selection panel. So the selection process is a little bit similar, but they are different methods.
The only other question I had, because I really like the construction manager risk because of all the players being involved in this process, can there actually be some stakeholders to make sure, there's input?
There can be. So the county administrator, I believe, is the party who would be appointing the selection committee, but depending on what the project is and who it involves, you could have, any number of people involved on the team, because your team would also be developing your specifications for what you want the consultant to achieve, the design builder. So the design builder has to know, do you want, how much square footage do you need? They need some basic, parameters in order to do their design. So that's something that it would be wise to run through stakeholders.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Ms. Lackey? I'll bring it to the board for entertainment if anyone.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion.
Go for it.
I move to adopt the guidelines for the selection, evaluation, and award of design build contracts as presented.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, I believe we have Ms. Lackey again. Reassessment Advisory Committee.
Yes, so as presented at the last meeting, Mr. Miller and I met with Judy Hart and Regina Puckett